Good evening, everyone. The American Horticultural Society is pleased to welcome you to today's program, Conversations with Great American Gardeners, featuring a dialogue between Dr. Lucinda McDade and Holly Shimizu. For the past 70 years, the American Horticultural Society's Great American Gardener Awards have recognized excellence in plant professions. Speakers in this year's webinar series are selected from among the awardees. These webinars and all AHS programs share about the critical role of plants, gardens, and green spaces in creating healthy, livable communities and a sustainable planet. I may be a new face for some of you. My name is Courtney Allen. I joined the American Horticultural Society this past winter as Director of National Programs. I come with a background and passion in gardens programming, landscape history, and museum education. Prior to AHS, I directed and managed educational programs for the Arnold Arboretum of Harvard University, Native Plant Trust, and the Huntington Gardens. I'm delighted to be a part of the AHS team and to grow our national programs in exciting new ways. As we begin tonight's program, a reminder that we are in webinar format. This is a format used for large audiences. We have several hundred registrants for this program. In webinar format, only the presenters have their cameras and mics enabled. Audience members are welcome to submit your questions using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. We will address as many questions as our time allows at the end of the program. I'm pleased to introduce our conversation facilitator for the evening, Holly Shimizu. Holly has been a lover of plants, gardens, and nature since her childhood. After studying horticulture at Penn State, she worked in European gardens for over 3 years. Upon her return, she became the first curator of the National Herb Garden at the U.S. National Arboretum and received her Master's of Science in Horticulture from the University of Maryland. She worked as managing director of the Lewis Ginter Botanical Garden in Richmond, Virginia, and then was the executive director of the U.S. Botanic Garden for 15 years. Currently, Holly is on the board of the American Horticultural Society and the American Botanical Council. She heads the environmental committee in her town and writes for their newspaper. She wrote and illustrated her first children's book, Figgy and Fiona Search for a Home, and is now working on her second book. Holly has received many awards and honors for her work, and for over 10 years, Holly was one of the hosts for the Victory Garden television show on PBS. Welcome to Holly, who will introduce tonight's featured guest, Lucinda McDade.
Thank you, Courtney. And I'm happy that you're all joining us for this really interesting evening. So I'll tell you a little bit about Lucinda. Dr. Lucinda McDade joined Rancho Santa Ana Botanic Garden, that is now called California Botanic Garden, in 2006 as Director of Research and Chair of Botany Department at Claremont Graduate University. Since 2012, she's also served as the garden's executive director, and she serves as the chair of Botany Department at the Claremont Graduate University. And in that work, she collaborates with the Botanic Garden to offer graduate programs and things for her wonderful programs in plant sciences. Lucinda's research focuses on the large and charismatic plant family Acanthaceae and on the role of hybridization in plant evolutionary history. She's conducted extensive field work, including throughout the Americas, South Africa, Namibia, and Madagascar, and received grants from many incredible institutions. So from 1992 to 2000, Lucinda was professor and herbarium curator at the University of Arizona. Then she served as associate curator and chair of botany at the Academy of Natural Sciences until 2006. So we're thrilled that in 2021, Lucinda was the recipient of the Liberty Hyde Bailey Award from the American Horticultural Society. She also serves on the board of trustees of the Center for Plant Conservation. And Dr. Peter Raven described Lucinda's work as, quote, precise and illuminating, always representing a solid step forward. So welcome, Lucinda, and thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you very much. It's a great honor to join today. I should say that one of the most humbling experiences of my life was winning the Liberty Hyde Bailey Award, just because seriously, from the time I was an undergraduate, I've carried around the manual of cultivated plants and shown it to everybody. In fact, one of my PhD students from Arizona said, "Oh, that makes sense. You carried around that book all the time and told everybody to look it up in that book," or what, when they had an unknown that was a cultivar. Just that book is just amazing. I continue to not know how he did it.
It's true. It really is true. You have such an incredible background. Your whole life's work has been dedicated to plants. And I was particularly interested in reading that you worked in Costa Rica at La Selva, part of Organization for Tropical Studies. And I wondered how that impacted your work and your direction.
Well, I actually had the great honor and challenge of driving from North Carolina, where I was in graduate school at Duke University, basically to Panama twice while I was in graduate school. Now you'd hop on a plane and just go do it and rent a car or whatever, but it was a bit different then. And it actually seemed the most logical to us to pile 3 or 4 graduate students in a 4-wheel drive vehicle and drive all the way from North Carolina to Costa Rica and Panama. And so we did that not just once, but twice. And it was truly an absolutely formative experience. After those experiences, I was lucky enough to basically live in Costa Rica for more than a year. I was the director at La Selva Biological Station when I was a graduate student. Some of the people here with us this evening have probably been to La Selva, and you think of it as like a cushy kind of place for the wet tropics with air conditioning and things. And let me just tell you that it was not like that. When I was there as station manager, there were lots of challenges. There were no phones. We had a 2-way radio that worked unless the mountains, the Central Cordillera of Costa Rica, were seriously fogged in, and in that case you couldn't communicate. It was very, very challenging, but so fascinating and so interesting, and I am so grateful for every one of my experiences there. I know how to start a generator by hand, not pushing a button, but by spinning it and getting it going. I know how to go to a very small town and buy enough sheets for a group of 40 tourists who are coming when the office forgot to send us sheets. I just had a number of very remarkable experiences, and I'm very grateful for every single little bit of it.
But you're very modest. You also discovered new species of plants. And so that's really interesting.
Yeah, you had asked me how I chose the plant family Acanthaceae. And to be honest, my advisor in my first semester of grad school sort of said, "You need a group. Let's figure this out." And so I actually paged through the 1935, I think, Flora of Costa Rica by Stanley, and was looking for a group that had some hummingbird pollination, because I've always been fascinated by the relationships between hummingbirds and plants, animals and plants, but especially hummingbirds. Somehow that just spoke to my soul, and I imagine a number of other people can imagine that as well. I was very interested in using the scanning electron microscope as a source of characters, as a source of evidence for understanding relationships among plants. And the Acanthaceae are super famous for having pollen grains that are insanely variable. And I am not using the word insanely in a hyperbolic fashion. They are insanely variable. I could share something with you to show a plate of pollen diversity in Acanthaceae. So I knew that would be good. I was also very interested in the relationships among plants. And at that time, the way that you could approach that was through chromosome counts and seeing who might be derived from whom and that kind of thing. As I went through graduate school, and very, very happy for me, the storm of the revolution of analytical phylogenetic approaches sort of came on us, and I rapidly became a phylogeneticist. And so it all worked out pretty well. The only thing I would say is that there's no chromosomal variation in the group that I studied, but other aspects of it were terrific. And yes, there are still a huge number of species to be discovered, in particular in the tropics. While I was just kind of doing field work at La Selva, I discovered a couple of new species, including a gorgeous thing that's a vine and has magenta, absolutely gorgeous magenta bracts and long white flowers. It's an absolutely beautiful plant, gorgeous plant. And now it's actually been discovered from sort of the whole area of Nicaragua and northeastern Costa Rica. But those areas were very poorly known when I started my work, and mine was the very first collections of that plant.
Are gardeners growing that plant, Lucinda?
No, it's kind of fussy. Gardeners do grow a lot of Justicia. I have a number in my backyard here. I'm not a total purist when it comes to native plants, although I'm very enthusiastic about native plants, but many Acanthaceae are very well adapted to dry habitats, and so do fine in a Mediterranean climate with a little bit of supplemental water in them.
Okay.
Yeah, no, not that one. Vines are cranky. Not a lot of vines do super well, in my experience. Bignoniaceae,
Yes.
they do great in cultivation.
Yeah.
Acanthaceae are first of all rare, but then and then not very readily cultivated. But yeah, discovering a new species is an incredible honor. I've always found it to be an incredible honor. It's a huge amount of work because you have to, be sure it's a new species. No one wants to have their new species discovered to actually have been something that was described long ago, and the literature for which you should have, encountered in your research. So you need to go carefully and make sure you do have a new species. It's always one of the funnest things, you might be interested in this, is to get to name it.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. And so the names, I was asked at some point by the Costa Rican Biodiversity Institute, the whole group of people working on the treatments of Costa Rican plants and animals, were asked if we had a new species ready to go, and could we name it to thank the people of Norway. And so for better or worse, I raised my hand and said, yes, I have a new species of Ruellia ready to go. And so we ended up calling it. It was very hard to figure out how to thank the people of Norway. And the reason, of course, they wanted to thank the people of Norway is that the country of Norway had contributed substantial resources to the Costa Rican Biodiversity Institute, which was terrific. And the people of Norway deserve to be thanked absolutely for that. But the only name, after I consulted with all kinds of people who know botanical Latin better than I do, the only name that we could come up with was something like Norvegigratiosa, which is not the most, doesn't roll right off your tongue. The one that I'm the happiest or proudest about is Ruellia mira, which A is short and has a wonderful advantage in being very short and easy to spell. But I also think it means beautiful or, notable or noteworthy, but it also means look in Spanish. When you see something cool in the field in Spanish, you're going to say mira. And that's what somebody would say if they saw this beautiful plant in the field. So I really enjoyed.
I love that. Well, of course, your degrees are primarily in botany, but nowadays, what would you call your degree if you were studying plants? Would it be plant sciences? Is that what it would be?
Yeah, probably so. The way that the field of academic plant science has gone, there are quite few institutions that continue to offer botany degrees.
Yes.
My degree is in botany from Duke University, but the Duke Botany Department doesn't exist any longer. It's part of biology, but retains a strong emphasis, a strong corner or portion within the large biology department of strength in plant sciences. So yeah, plant science is a good term. I also call myself a comparative biologist or comparative botanist. comparative biologists or comparative botanists, or people who are interested in biodiversity, interested in species diversity, interested in relationships among plants and animals, interested in sort of the evolutionary relationships of life on Earth. And those are aspects of biology that have always, absolutely always just fascinated me.
Yes. I wonder, what are you seeing in terms of your students coming in and their interests, and I hope they're plentiful.
We are a small program here at California Botanic Garden in collaboration with Claremont Graduate University, which provides the accreditation and gives us access to the larger academic environment that is Claremont here. In addition to Claremont Graduate University, Pomona College is here, Harvey Mudd College is here, etc. Scripps College, Claremont McKenna, Pitzer College, all here in Claremont, all right across the street from me. If I had a good arm, I could hit one or two of them with a rock from my office, but I don't have that good of an arm. So our students, we are very small. As I said, we basically have 5 of us who accept graduate students, and we adopt in our field, and it's kind of like an apprenticeship. It's not just like you're coming and you're taking 6 or 8 courses and then you're going to get a master's degree.
Okay.
You're going to do a thesis or a dissertation, and it's going to be very hands-on, and it's going to require a lot of involvement of your advisor, who will be overseeing your work very closely, making sure that you're following the best procedures, the best practices for whatever
Yeah.
method you're using. And so we have 12 students at the present time, and we have both master students and PhD students. We get extremely good applicants. We cannot accept all of them because we're small, as I said, and we take our responsibilities as mentors so very seriously, that, I mean, I've never had more than about 4 students at a given time. That's plenty, because you need to work with them pretty closely. A lot of our master students, this may be interesting to people, almost all of our master students do what are called floristic studies. They identify an area of almost always California, but we have one working right now just over the border in Nevada, and we've had students work in northern Baja California before. They identify an area from which there are few specimens at the present time, and then they go to work to fix that, basically to collect everything they can find in flower in their couple or 3 field seasons, and bring it in, identify it. They have a mapped area, and they catalog, they map all of the routes that they've taken collecting. They usually collect between 1,500 and 2,000 specimens, depending on the year, depending on the rainfall, et cetera. But and then at the end, they publish a floristic treatment which documents with plant specimens, and that's really critical, because if you don't have specimens, physical specimens in a herbarium backing up the fact that the plant was there, it's really just an anecdote.
Yes.
Or a picture or whatever, but you really need a specimen. And so our students are very seriously schooled in specimen collecting and doing the right thing with their specimens. And so we're really proud of that work. One of the missions, as told to us by our founder, Susanna Bixby Bryant, is to document the flora of California. And so those master students are doing exactly mission central work, and we really value what they do. And they find new things all the time. We have new county records coming forward. We've had new records for California coming out of these kinds of studies. You go to a place and you basically collect everything, and you're going to find something new. Our PhD students tend to work on specific groups, as I did for my dissertation, working on Aphelandra in the Acanthaceae, and they become the world's expert in that group.
Yes.
Do whatever is necessary to understand it and understand its relationships among the species in the group and to other species outside of the group.
Yes. So how do you translate the science, some of the science that we're talking about, to your visitors who come to your botanic garden?
So one of the things that I personally love a great deal about working at a botanic garden is that right down the hall from me is our community education staff. And they are charged with doing exactly that, with taking the amazing knowledge base that's here at the garden and, you know, bringing it to bear on people's real lives at the right level for them. You know, for school kids, we do family things that go bump in the night, and we have carnivorous plants and night pollinated plants and various things. And you know, then for other more advanced people, we just did a great course in landscape gardening, in habitat gardening. So one of our horticulturists did a great class on, you know, how to turn your boring lawn into a you know, a wildlife habitat, and people loved it. It was a wonderful, wonderful class. So
Are you able to reach broader audiences and not just preach to the choir?
well, you know, that's been such an interesting thing during COVID, is that we realized that if we are hybrid, or during the height of COVID, of course, we were purely virtual, but we can reach a broader group. And so for a little while here in the at least semi post-COVID times, we've been in person because everybody seemed to really be craving that. But we're about to go to hybrid. We're about to go to both offering a Zoom link for people and having it be in person. And we'll see how that works. It's, you know, not everybody can manage that level of of multitasking, but we'll see how that works. I'm actually doing a class in a 10 days or so for our community education program. I think it's called Getting Started, and it's about how to tear out your lawn, and then, you know, things to do as you're planning for your new landscape. So it's kind of fun. It's a lot of fun. So
I mean, I'll speak for myself. I tend to think of, gosh, the Mediterranean climate, it's ideal, anything grows, but what is it really like when you're gardening in the Mediterranean climate?
One of the things that has come to me that I have realized over the years that I've been at California Botanic Garden, which is dedicated to California native plants. Of course, I've always been a native plant enthusiast because I'm a plant scientist. That's sort of who we are, right? But I've realized that to some degree, some of horticulture is sort of fighting your climate or trying to get around its limitations, right?
True.
And you know, I think that's fine. I'm not at all against people who fancy orchids, growing tropical orchids in wherever they are within reason. But I think that in general, our landscapes would be well to move toward sort of plant choices, landscape choices that are at home in their environments rather than fighting them. And so that's what we try to do here when we talk. Part of our mission is to increase appreciation of California native plants, and that involves trying to get them out into people's home gardens. But we're not stupid about this. You know, we recognize that there are challenges. A lot of Southern California in particular, by about August, looks pretty brown. And not a lot of people want their home landscape to look like that. And so we've been kind of at pains to work with, to develop, to make available to our public plants that stay green. There are a number of plants that, boy, you can not give them water for 6 months and they're still green. I have no idea how they do it. These plants, California native plants, in my opinion, deserve immense respect for living in what is actually a quite challenging environment. Imagine it, just as soon as as everything gets nice and wet and the temperatures start to warm up, come about, say, May, the giant faucet in the sky gets turned completely off, and it is dry in many parts of California from, say, May through September, maybe October, and it can be flaming hot. I mean, you know, vast majority of horticultural practices are based on getting water during the summer, which is the time that a plant wants to grow. So our plants are absolutely amazing. Then it starts raining just as it starts getting chilly, and And, you know, what's a plant supposed to do with that? Plants can't regulate their own body temperatures. Just when they start getting water, you know, they're asked to suddenly photosynthesize and do all of those physiological things that plants do. It's a very challenging thing. A funny thing, you know, we just had this giant Hurricane Hillary just went through, and I'm sure that every single part of our area got record ever rainfall for August. It does not rain in August, maybe little tiny bits. We got almost 4 inches, just spectacular rainfall. I have tropical houseplants. I admit, I'm not a purist, as I said. I love the plants I love, and I encourage everybody to love the plants they love and take care of them. But I never get to move my tropical plants out into the rain. Everybody knows how plants love natural rain, right? Because we don't get warm rain. But I moved them out, and they loved it. My Costas loved it. My Calathea loved it. And so, now they're back inside. But yeah, they loved it. Warm rain, very unusual. So
Yeah.
it's very tough climate, actually. People think of it as very mild and gentle. And actually, often one of the first things I do when I do a talk for the general public is to just lead with that. I want to make sure that everybody understands the Mediterranean climate, and that although it's gentle for us, it's not really all that gentle for a plant unless you pour a lot of water on it, which here in Southern California and California in general, we just cannot keep doing. Water is not unlimited. I want to go back and say one thing. You asked me about how we take sort of what we do out to the public. And I want to mention the fact that we have a collaboration between our community education program and our graduate program. Every semester we have at least one student, and often two, who are doing their teaching assistantship by working with community education. And so they're out there working with the public, they're sharing with the public who they are, what they do. They often will teach classes, and they get very serious experience in informal education, which I think is just wonderful for them in terms of career building and resume building. Our students also give massive numbers of talks to the general public, for example, to the California Native Plant Society chapters on their floristics work. So they get a lot of experience.
Yeah, it's so great now to see how so many plant scientists and scientists are coming forward with the priority of communication, you know, understanding we've got to make it real for the public. And it's so great. But I think that you all have a plant nursery at your garden too. Is that right?
Yeah, we operate a seasonal nursery, retail nursery that we call Grow Native Nursery. And Grow Native Nursery, get it? And
Yeah.
we open it in October, and it stays open into May. That actually makes it a quite challenging business model for us. But we are an educational organization, and one of our major missions is to educate people about native plants. And one of the messages about native plants is that in almost nowhere in Southern California should you plant one in June, because it's not going to rain for 5 months, 4 months, 5 months. And that's going to make it very challenging for that plant to get established. And so I just we've talked often about staying open during the summer, but I've never been able to like the idea of our nursery staff in July answering the question, when should I plant this, with October or November? Because to me, the customer then would say, then why are you selling it to me now?
Exactly.
And so we actually close during the summer, and our nursery staff are tasked to do other things at the garden. In fact, the young woman who runs our nursery spent a lot of the summer working with our community education people, because she's very, very dedicated to outreach, and that worked wonderfully well.
Well, I think you bring up a really important point in American horticulture, which is that we're one country with so many different regions and climates, and we really, each of them is so different. And that's something that's really a struggle in putting a book together for the country, but also we have to focus on more and more, that yeah, you can grow a petunia here, but it doesn't mean you can grow it there, and so forth and so on. And I always think back to Lady Bird Johnson, and she said, I want Texas to look like Texas. And I love that. I think that applies so well, don't you?
I love that too. I think that's really brilliant of her to have come up with that. I guess it's a metaphor. I think it's a metaphor. It's wonderful. Yeah, she wants
Yeah.
Texas to look like Texas. Yes, I completely agree. Yeah.
Well, I think gardeners hopefully are recognizing that, because I want the plants in my garden that want to be there. They want to be here. They're happy, and I'm not fussing over them.
Yeah. Right, yeah.
Um,
You have a section within which you fuss on certain things that you just find fascinating, that
Well,
that touch
right.
your heart, that touch your plant spirit, you know,
That's right.
your love of plants. It's fine. Again, I'm not a total purist. I really think that if you get such joy from growing your whatever it may be,
Yeah.
you know, yeah,
As
whatever.
long
it
as
may
it's
be.
not invasive.
As long as it's not invasive. If it's invasive, you best keep it inside,
That's right.
like your
And
cat.
then, yeah. And then I think related to your plant conservation work, you have a seed bank.
Yeah,
Love to
we
hear about it.
Yeah, we are the California Seed Bank. So one thing that everybody should know is that the state of California has more than a third of all of the plant species that occur in North America. And it's, you know, it's a big state, but it's not that big. And it's all about the Mediterranean climate zone, which for whatever reason, everywhere that weird climate happens on planet Earth, it is incredibly diverse, and we do not understand that. It's fascinating.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's incredibly diverse, and about a third of it is only occurs in California, and about a third of it is in some way endangered or threatened. And so we have, for the last, gosh, probably 30 years, really focused on doing our best with to make conservation seed collections of the ones that are of conservation concern at all. And they are stored in our seed bank, which is a wonderful facility now, big chest freezers, nothing special about them except that they are not frost free. Because the frost-free process involves heating up a little bit to thaw the ice, and that's not good for the seeds. They want to be held at a constant temperature. So they're not frost-free, but other than that, they're just like a giant chest freezer that you might have in your garage if you have a big family, because they're big. And the seeds are stored in those freezers, and I'm so excited because in the last few years, we've done a terrific job with providing backup power for them. We started with a dual fuel generator, which first burns natural gas, which we have online to the building. And then if the natural gas goes out, as it would in a big earthquake, they would turn it off immediately because you don't want little to large fires everywhere. Then it cycles to propane, which we have on site, large tanks with earthquake straps to hold them in place. And so that's great. And then just more recently, we put a solar system on it. So now it's got solar panels on the roof, and those solar panels charge these just terrific rechargeable batteries that in turn actually they power the entire horticulture complex, but if the power goes down, they focus all of their juice on the seed house. And so it's a fantastic system, and it's worked wonderfully for us since we've had it.
And then how did the seeds get dispersed or used or?
So I want to say one thing about how the seeds get in there.
Yes.
And one of the things that I think many people think is, well, okay, you've got a couple thousand rare and endangered. Just go out and you find a couple of them, grab some seeds, slam them in the freezer, for done. You know, what's the big deal? Here's the point. When you do a conservation seed collection, you actually want to preserve the genetic diversity of the population of plants from which you collected the seeds. You don't just want one. You know, imagine if you wanted to conserve the amazing genetic diversity that is in human beings. You know, you wouldn't just take us three, you would take a sample of people from all across the globe, because what we're trying to do with that seed collection is be ready for a catastrophe on the landscape that might take it out, and you never can tell which combination of genes might work the best for whatever comes next, right?
Mm.
And so you basically have to collect seeds from 50 maternal plants, so 50 seed producing plants. And you cannot take more than 5% of the seeds that are produced in your sample population in a given year. You're not after decimating the plant in the field, right?
Right.
Sometimes you have to go back multiple years. It can be a very, very complicated process. And then you have to keep those, we call them maternal lines. So this flowering plant, fruiting plant here, you've got to keep its seeds separate from the ones that came from the plant over there. So it's a very, very painstaking process to make a true conservation seed collection.
Yeah, I did not know that. That is fascinating.
Yeah, I realized when I started giving tours, a little bit into giving tours, that I could see people's faces going, well, just go get them. I mean, what's the big deal? And then I realized I needed to explain that a little bit more
Yeah.
thoroughly so that they understood it's just not walking up to one oak tree and grabbing some things. But
Yeah.
oak trees are not a good example because oaks are what are called recalcitrant, which means that you can't just put acorns in the freezer, because when you pull them out of the freezer, they will rot and take the embryo with them. So you have to do special embryo in liquid nitrogen methods to save acorns. So it's a very painstaking process. But we
Yeah.
actually, here at the garden, we take a different approach to some of our threatened oak species. We actually plant conservation groves on site. And so we will have little oak trees that came from multiple different mothers with their lineages all recorded and all of that. And they're great.
Oh.
Super proud of them. They can make beautiful groves, just
Oh,
absolutely beautiful.
that's so great. And we learned on one of our other sessions that, planting them in groves, in communities is very good for them, and they really like that.
Yeah. I think, and it should work well too when if we're wanting to collect acorns from them once they start reproducing, because they'll be close to each other. These are wind pollinated plants, and so they want to pollinate with each other, not with anybody else. So.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I hope other gardens are doing that.
Yeah, I think some are, and we really focus on the ones that are called recalcitrant, which means that they can't be just conventionally seed banked in -20 freezers. They need special treatment. We're not set up here to do liquid nitrogen. Some other seed banks are, and certainly the big facility in Fort Collins is set up to do that. The National Germplasm Bank. You ask about how they're used. We accept requests from anybody to use seeds. We honor essentially all requests for research use, and we subject to the terms under which we collected the seeds. We will also honor requests to have them in other botanic gardens. We are very much after sort of spreading the eggs around, not having them all in one basket. But some of our permits for seed collecting don't let us do that for the first generation of seeds, so we would have to grow them out and then, then provide others. So we have to follow, obviously, you will understand, we have to follow the terms of our permits, which sometimes have special stipulations.
Yeah.
Which is an entire other bookkeeping issue, but that's fine, yeah.
So I know you're involved and have been for some time with the Center for Plant Conservation. And tell us a little bit about the work that they're doing.
Yeah, the Center for Plant Conservation is a really great organization. It's about to turn 40 years old. It is basically, at least originally, a set of gardens and arboreta that were devoted primarily to seed banking. They've kind of expanded the kinds of thematic things that are encompassed, that the group is interested in. And something that really excites me about the Center for Plant Conservation is that it's beginning to work kind of more and more, not just as a large network, but as a set of regional networks, because sometimes it really makes sense to work in a regional network. Here in California, we have it's actually an informal group, even though it's extremely effective. that we call the California Plant Rescue. And it's a group of organizations, including botanic gardens, but including others as well, who are doing any collecting at all of seeds of California native plants. And we determined that we could be most effective, shock, by getting on the same page, communicating, sharing the same database, and talking to each other about what our plans are. We're going to go get these 5 species this summer. Okay, we'll go get these 5 different ones. It just makes such a huge amount of sense. And the Center for Plant Conservation has fully embraced the caper approach and is very enthusiastic about it and has helped us in a number of ways, because as I said, caper is not really a legal institution. And the Center for Plant Conservation has launched kind of a parallel endeavor in Florida, which cutely enough is called Flipper, Florida Plant Rescue. Makes sense, right? And so that's just kind of really getting going. But the same way in Florida also has a lot of endangered species, a lot of rare, threatened, and endangered species. And so we're super excited to have the Flipper group kind of working along the same model to the degree that it works. There's no need to be perfectly cookie cutter, but the same model to the degree that it's worked in California and that we can offer advice. I think it just makes a huge amount of sense. We're talking about, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Oh, I was going to just say that, I mean, really to do effective work, hands-on work, you really do need to do it in a smaller group in partnership, however you set it up. But that's how to really get the work physically done,
Yeah.
right?
It really makes a lot of sense. And it's kind of a unit that allows really effective communication about somewhat the same topics. That said, the Center for Plant Conservation is itself kind of a collaborative organization that of gardens and arboreta that share a lot of the same methods and concerns and all of that. But yes, you can have kind of focused working groups under that larger umbrella. I kind of view it as a very large umbrella, and then medium to smaller sized umbrellas nested under it. I think that makes perfect sense. If you're familiar with the concept of fractal, which means that things scale and are somewhat the same, even though you're looking at different scales, I think that makes sense. We're talking about trying to implement one in New England as well, which would make a lot of sense. Texas probably deserves its own because it's very large, as you know. I've lost sound of Holly. Holly, you've gone mute, unmute.
I'm so sorry. I have a lot of insects making a lot of noise, so I muted myself. I'm sorry. I was thinking about Courtney and thinking it might be time for questions. Courtney, what do you think?
Yes, we can definitely do that. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. All right, I will cut back onto the screen. And we can start off with the Q&A. And I encourage everyone who has been watching and listening to all of this fantastic conversation to put your questions into the Q&A. And I'll start off with one of mine. Lucinda, it was so fascinating to hear you talk about how the California Botanic Garden is doing work to encourage plant conservation through creating the groves. And so that's a direct example of how gardening, at least in kind of an academic sense, can draw from plant research. And I'm also betting there are a lot of people out there and listening this evening who are wondering, like, as an average American gardener who is either working in a community garden or in their backyard, what can they do in their gardening practice to encourage plant preservation or plant diversity?
Mm-hmm. Super good question. I think one thing that that one can do is to try to grow plants. First of all, you should grow the plants that you love. As I've said, I think you really want to love your garden. But if you can, incorporate plants that are local and that are of relatively local genotypes, because that's going to bring plants that are very well adapted to your local area. And that's actually easier some places than it is here in California. Our geography here is so dissected. We've got 10,000-foot mountains over there and 9,000 over there. And, you know, it just creates this incredible matrix of habitat diversity such that exactly what is adapted to exactly where can be a little challenging. When you're in a slightly flatter, less topographically complex area, I think it's a bit easier. So growing some plants that are locally native, I think is a very good idea. If you have enough space to grow sort of multiple individuals of you know, some plants at least, that's a good thing. If you are fascinated by butterfly plants or bird plants, whatever, you know, try to grow a couple or three or so of different genotypes. And you'll have to ask where you buy the plants, you know, whether it's exactly the same or whether it's, you know, likely to be a different actual genetic individual. But if you can grow multiple genotypes of a given species. One of the beauties of having a native plant landscape, at least partly, is that of course you're restoring a little bit of nature to your suburban yard, which for me is a great value, to have a better place for native plants and animals to be.
Absolutely. Thank you. I love what you say about, you know, go with what you love, right? And it's supposed to be, gardening is a source of joy for so many people. And I also take very much the importance of your point in terms of the sourcing. And I know that was part of the conversation as well with the nursery, and of making sure that you have a sense of where your plants are coming from so that you can preserve this genetic diversity. Holly, do you have any thoughts on those things?
Well, no, I do know a nurseryman, a really innovative young nurseryman, and there are others like him. I just know him, and that's what he's focusing on, and that's what he's educating all of his customers and clients on. And for most people, it's a very new concept. You know, where has it come from and what is its source? But he tracks all of it. And so I see it happening, and I think it's really important. And so I'm actually going to put him in for an award because he's very innovative. And so I love seeing this. And in fact, I heard that at our local garden center, which unfortunately did sell and maybe does a lot of invasives, but at any rate, a lot of the people were asking for native plants. I mean, a lot. And this year, people would come in and they would get angry and they would say, "You don't have native plants, and why are you selling English ivy?" You know, and so it's been hard for the staff. I mean, they shouldn't sell English ivy, but you know, it's just these changes sometimes are slow to get to the nurseries. But you know, I hope we can gradually change this.
And it's very challenging for nurseries, and I don't want to make their lives any more challenging. But you know, one of the issues that we've had in California trying to advocate for native plants in horticulture is, in some places you just can't find them. There aren't, you know, the big box stores don't carry them, or they carry a vanishingly tiny line of native plants among all the standard sort of cultivars. And so it's a real challenge, and it's also a real challenge for our commercial growers to deal with things that sometimes really are a niche market. You know, they've got, the nursery business is a tough business model. And you know, I think that we ignore the toughness of the business model kind of at our peril. It's important for us to work as closely as we can with our commercial partners, you know, trying to encourage them to, in our case, to grow California native plants, even though it's hard because they don't really lend themselves to the same cultural practices as ivy or pansies or, you know, any number of things that are very common in the trade.
Yes, so true.
Very interesting. Thank you. Thank you, Lucinda. Another question that was coming through was about, you were talking about mapping flora back at the beginning of the conversation, and how your graduate students go out and they go to areas where flora has not been as mapped, so to speak. And I think that part of the question is, how are those areas identified? And then a follow-up question of like, once things are mapped out, what are the preservation implications once people know where those things are?
Yeah, good questions. So we have an amazing tool, and I'm sorry to be so California-philic or whatever, but we have an amazing tool in California called the Consortium of California Herbaria. Herbaria are museums of plant specimens that are preserved for study, for documentation, for research use, and for education. And we have been involved in a now 15-year in earnest effort to database our collections so that you, with the database, you know exactly where this particular specimen came from. And you also will know who identified it. And eventually you will have an image of it available to you online so that you can even say, I think you're wrong. I don't think that is that species. But in any case, we've been doing this in California as a collaborative effort across California herbaria now for 15-ish years, maybe longer, yeah. And we've got about more than 2 million herbarium specimens are now databased, and probably 500,000 or so are imaged. And what that means is that you can partner those data with mapping tools. And you can ask not just where specimens have been collected, but you can ask where specimens have not been collected. And we call that identifying botanical black holes. And so, you might find an area, and also we always tell our students, or I always tell our students, you must fall in love with your site because you're going to have some tough days there. You're going to have days when it's really hot. You're going to have days when it's cold. You're going to have days when it's raining. You're going to have some really tough days, and you better be in love with that site, and you better want to document the flora of it very thoroughly. So anyway, some of our students have a love of the desert, and they'll identify a black hole in the desert that they go out to. Others, we've had a group of students for a while who are working on documenting the eastern flank of the Southern Sierra, which also has a number of sort of botanical black holes. And a botanical black hole can look like basically just a few dots where specimens came from. The other symptom of a black hole is like a line of collections, and that's the road going across. And that means that, yeah, there's been a little bit of collecting, but only along the roads and nothing off of the roads. And so, so the student will identify an area that is under-collected and also really speaks to their heart in terms of what the landscape looks like, in terms of, its appeal to them for whatever reason. Some want trees, some want flowing water, some want desert. Different things speak to different people's hearts, and I firmly believe in honoring that aspect of choosing a site for our master's students. And then in the end, they first of all, they have to finish their specimens, which means their specimens go into the Consortium of California Herbaria, and now their black hole looks like it's got dots all over it, which is that student's work. There's actually this really cool tool where you can look at the development of specimens from a given area over time, and you can see our students' master's theses. Oh, there's Naomi out there. Oh, there's so-and-so over there. There's so-and-so over there as the dots fill in. It's great. It's really cool to see. And so they will do that phase. They will make sure that they're all databased, and they will be entered into the consortium so that they're available, and they'll be in our herbarium here. And also, if they're duplicates, they'll be distributed to other herbaria that really have an interest in their particular area. And then they will they will publish a publication, a relatively long paper that documents their site and the work they did and the specimens, the plant list from that site, with sometimes different things included depending on the student's particular interest. So it gets pretty thoroughly documented and incorporated into the record of plant knowledge.
That's absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much, Lucinda. Another question that we received, and if anyone has more questions, please go ahead and put them into the Q&A. Also, at the beginning of your talk, you were mentioning about vines, and you were saying that vines are particularly difficult to cultivate. And so one of our audience members was saying, like, why are they difficult to cultivate? What, in your experience, why
You
might
know,
that be?
I shouldn't make that blanket statement because there are a lot of vines in cultivation, but it's just vines of Acanthaceae in particular. They're to my knowledge, well, you know what, there are. So some of the people on the webinar here with us will know the black-eyed Susan that isn't a composite, that isn't an Asteraceae. It's a Thunbergia. And that is actually an Acanthaceae as long as you make the border, the limits of the family a little broadish. And those are mostly vines, and they are in cultivation in places where they will grow. Probably everybody's tried black-eyed Susan because it's so charismatic when it starts flowering with those orange flowers and sort of black throats. But there's other terrific ones too that require a more tropical, subtropical kind of habitat. There aren't, in other parts of Acanthaceae, there are not very many vines, and the ones that there are just not in cultivation. But I should not, and I don't really know. I will say that one thing about the group that has a few vines in it is that the stems are jointed, and when you're trying to propagate the plant vegetatively, it tends to break apart into just sort of internodes, which is just very challenging to grow.
That's fascinating. That's really fascinating. Holly, any thoughts or experience with vines or with difficulty propagating things?
Well, yes, I have found vines in my mind. Sort of, I put them into two kind of categories. Those that, I know, like I always tell people, the theory when you plant something, and it usually is true, is year one sleep, year two creep, year three leap. And I confessed so many years ago, I mean, I liked Ampelopsis, but who knew? I had no idea back then that it was going to be killing the trees all over my neighborhood. We just didn't know. There's so much we didn't know now that we're learning about some of these really invasive vines, but it's very painful to see how they're covering and really I killing the trees. And we really have to deal with it because we're a wooded area. And so I love vines, but at this time, I'm really focused on getting rid of the invasives.
Yeah,
And then we have others that just won't grow for me. Sorry.
I remember when wisteria was not invasive, and now it's massively invasive in parts of the US. Horrible thing.
Totally. And the way it chokes things, they don't have a chance.
It's as bad as kudzu in some places, it seems like. It's
it's very upsetting.
Yeah, you need to be careful with vines. They can go aggressive. They can go all aggressive on you.
Yeah. So, yeah, I agree.
That's an excellent tip, and I think we received a question that I think might be an excellent final question for the Q&A session, which is tips and techniques, like you were just talking about, specifically for the Mediterranean climate. What would you recommend to gardeners who are working in that area or who are looking to start gardening in the Mediterranean climate? What tips or techniques would you recommend?
The first thing is to plant at the right time of the year. That will just make your life so much easier. Our horticultural staff here love October because the days are nice and short. It's getting cooler, the nights are cooler, but the soil is still warm. And that lets the roots grow and get roots. I always say, when you're planting a plant, close your eyes and visualize what's happening. What's happening is you want those roots to grow. The above ground part is only a symptom of what the roots are doing. So close your eyes and picture everything that you're doing and how it's making life better for those roots that you're trying to get down there. And so October is kind of the sweet spot. November's fine too, December's fine too, really. But with the soil being warm, that really helps the plant get going. In the Mediterranean climate, you're all about supporting your new plant in getting roots down there so that it's ready come May, June, July, when it's stopped raining and it can be really hot. The deeper those roots, the better your plant is going to be able to survive its first year, and that's the key. Once they survive a year, they're generally pretty good to go. So that by far is the main thing. The other thing I just want to say that I love so much about native plants is that they rarely take any kinds of pesticides, don't require herbicides, don't require fertilizers. All of these things that we are increasingly aware, end up washing out of our home landscapes and down into the storm drains and eventually out into the ocean as pollution. And I think those of us who have native gardens in our hearts really value kind of not being part of that problem. It means a lot to me to think that if water's coming off of my landscape, it's just clean water. Yeah.
So you have been so inspiring and insightful, and you connect the dots between the science and the practical and the hands-on, and it's so valuable. And your lifetime's work is absolutely extraordinary. So I really thank you so much, Lucinda, and appreciate all that you're doing.
Well, thank you so much. I have to say it's been a wonderful pleasure talking to you, Holly, and you too, Courtney. And I want to say that it's been a total blast. I have enjoyed basically every single thing that I've done. There's the occasional moment, of course, but it's just an absolutely wonderful career to do something that you're fascinated by every single day. And I've really valued it, and I feel extremely fortunate. So.
Yes, wow, that's great. Well, thank you. I know, Courtney, you like to wrap things up.
I will, and also thank you so much, Lucinda. And I think that joy that you have for this particular field and this career, I bet that there are people listening tonight who are inspired by that and who are perhaps looking to go into that same kind of field or a similar kind of career. And I hope that they are, yes, inspired by you. And I know you said that you only have maybe like 4 people that you are mentoring at any given time, but you may be mentoring people you don't even know about. So there's that.
And that's mentoring as graduate students. There are other ways to mentor people.
There are other ways to mentor. It's true. It's true. All right. So thank you both so very much. And just a couple of announcements before we end this webinar. For those of you who enjoyed tonight's program and would like to see it again, we do plan to make the recording available very soon on our AHS YouTube page. Our final session in the Great American Gardeners webinar series will be on October 4th, when Holly will be in conversation with Claire Sawyers, who is the director of Scott Arboretum of Swarthmore College and also this year's AHS Bailey Award winner. The registration for that will open next week on the American Horticultural Society website. I am also excited to share that next week, the American Horticultural Society will reveal details and open registration for over 20 new fall and winter programs as part of our new lifelong learning branch of national programs. Programs will feature internationally renowned horticulturalists and plant professionals representing regions across the country. So keep your eye on your email for the big announcement next week. And finally, we value your feedback and ideas as we plan for the future of AHS programs. So immediately after this webinar, all registrants will receive a survey. This will give you the opportunity to offer feedback on tonight's program and also to share about your interests and preferences for future programming. So please take a couple minutes to complete the survey. Thank you again for spending the past hour with us. And we look forward to seeing you again soon at another American Horticultural Society program. Good night, everyone.